Hey everyone, it's Dr. NightStare. Glad you're here. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Alright, let's get settled. Get comfortable, let your body relax, and just take it easy. I first saw him across the street from my apartment building. He stood still, a dapper man in a dark suit watching my window. A prickle on my skin came, though he offered no direct look. Days later, he appeared near my corner cafe, observing the entrance. The initial unease tightened its grip. One morning, after making coffee, I placed the mug on my kitchen counter. I walked away from my phone. Returning, I saw the mug had moved, a hair's breadth to the left. I knew I had positioned it in the center. Someone had been inside my apartment. I reported it to the police, describing the man and the moved mug. The officer listened, but his voice suggested disbelief. He explained there were no signs of forced entry, no damage to anything inside. He told me they needed proof of a crime for any action. His words did not offer comfort. They left me alone. My peace evaporated. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every settling sound of my old building became a potential footstep. I checked the door locks multiple times, peering through the peephole before opening the door. Sleep grew scarce. My apartment, once a haven, now felt like an exposed place. The Dapper Man continued to appear, distant and always watching me. He never spoke a word or moved closer. His relentless presence tightened the knot of dread within me. My isolation intensified. The Dapper Man became a constant shadow. He no longer kept a distant vigil. I saw him on my own street, standing by the lamppost directly outside my building. Sometimes he stood within the small park across from my window, always facing my direction. His relentless presence became a suffocating weight. I saw him everywhere, even when he was not there. The line between what I saw and what I only imagined began to dissolve around me. One night, a sudden jarring displacement took me. I did not move, but my surroundings changed. My apartment melted away. I stood in a room that felt familiar yet was utterly wrong. The walls were a pale green color. Sunlight streamed through a window I did not recognize. The Dapper Man stood across from me. He watched me with the same steady, unwavering gaze. He did not speak. He did not move. He only watched. My fear intensified, but a strange calm settled over me. Visions began to unfold before my eyes. They were vivid, detailed scenes of a life I did not remember living. I saw myself laughing with a group of people, faces I did not know, yet they seemed close. I saw a different apartment, a different job, a future that was not mine, but felt intimately connected to my own being. The Dapper Man remained in the periphery of these visions. He was a silent guide, directing my gaze, showing me moments that felt like lost memories. Each scene played out with intense clarity. They felt real, more real than my actual life. I watched myself live a life that was meant for me, a life that had somehow been taken away. The images faded, leaving behind a deep ache in my chest. The pale green room blurred. A sharp prick startled me. I felt a sudden coldness enter my arm. My vision swam. The Dapper Man's face was the last thing I saw before a heavy darkness consumed me completely. I awoke in my own bed. The morning light filtered through my apartment window. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. My arm felt sore. I pushed back the sleeve of my nightgown. A small red mark showed on my inner forearm, a tiny puncture wound. It was real. It was physical proof. My heart pounded against my ribs. I called the police again. I told them everything, about the strange room and the visions and the mark on my arm. They sent an officer. He looked at the small red dot on my arm. He looked around my apartment for signs of forced entry. He found nothing. He explained that a tiny mark could be anything. He said there was no evidence of a break-in. He said they could not investigate further. His words were polite, but his eyes held the same dismissive pity as before. The mark would fade. The visions would remain. I was alone with my fractured reality. My apartment walls closed in. The air thickened. Sleep brought his unwavering gaze. My mind played tricks. I saw the Dapper Man in dark corners, in my window's reflection. He never moved, only watched. Fear tightened its hold on my throat. I stopped eating. My stomach twisted with dread. Every sound became his approach. A creaking floorboard froze me. The refrigerator's noise hitched my breath. My own shadow stretched across the wall, and I saw him, a looming presence. I screamed. No sound came out. My throat was dry. My voice gone. The visions of that other life returned, mixing with my present. I could not tell memory from hallucination. Faces of laughing strangers flashed. I felt deep loss for their happiness. That stolen life called to me. He controlled my personal nightmare, showing me what I had lost, what he had taken. I paced my small apartment day and night. The outside world faded. Sunlight hurt my eyes. City sounds grated. My skin crawled from constant observation. His gaze burned from every direction. No true relief existed. He reached me everywhere. The thought came, growing with certainty. Only one way existed to escape him. He could not follow or touch me there. This was not about ending myself. This was about ending him, taking back control, finding freedom. I walked to the kitchen. My hands shook, but resolve was clear. The blade shimmered under dim light. I held it. It felt cold, felt real. I looked at my reflection. The Dapper Man stood behind me, his image superimposed. He watched always. This was my final stand. I closed my eyes. I pushed the blade. Pain was sudden, sharp. A release came. I fell. The world went dark. He was gone. I raised the glass, taking a long drink of water. A shock seized my chest, twisting my body. Steam erupted from my mouth, scalding my throat as I convulsed. The room spun. A vision assaulted me then, my own flesh ripped by grasping forms, teeth tearing, consuming. I screamed, thrashing, convinced I was dying. The vision vanished. I lay there gasping, sweat on my skin, my mind reeling. My body felt whole, but the wooden table beside me was splintered. Still reeling, I looked around my damaged room. My old wallet had been knocked onto the floor. I picked it up, intending to put it away, and a faded photo slipped out. It showed me seated at a restaurant table, grinning at the camera, my face smeared with sauce. Before me sat a platter piled high with glistening raw meat, oddly shaped and dark. The restaurant's name, the Butcher's Block, was etched into the bottom of the photo. I drove there, the address online. Its exterior was dark brick, windowless, almost like a tomb. A server with bright red hair and an apron stained dark red saw me enter the dim interior. Her eyes widened, and a wide smile spread across her face. "You're back," she exclaimed, her voice loud, cutting through the low murmur of other diners. "The Midnight Feast Challenge," she continued, her excitement palpable. "You beat it not once, but twice. No one else has ever done that." A cold dread settled in my stomach. I remembered none of it. "The second time," she leaned in conspiratorially, "you even left with that beautiful redhead. She was waiting for you outside." My mind drew a blank. There was no image, no name, no memory of any redhead. She pointed to the photo I still held in my hand. "That one was taken exactly 2 years ago today. You were quite a legend that night." The date on the back confirmed her words, a chill running through me. This was not just a forgotten meal. It was a gaping hole in my past, a disturbing blank space tied to a specific unsettling anniversary. I looked at the server, my mind reeling from the revelation. "There are others?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Of course," she said, her smile not faltering. She walked over to a display cabinet near the entrance, pulling out 2 more framed photos. "We keep them all," she announced, placing them on the table beside the first one. I leaned closer, my breath catching. Each photo showed me in the same challenge, the raw meat piled high. Each photo was dated exactly the same as the first, 2 years ago today. A sickening realization washed over me. This was not a forgotten incident. This was a pattern, a recurring event, a horrifying ritual I had been a part of. My hand trembled as I reached for one of the frames, my fingers brushing against the cool glass. The frame slipped, crashing against the table, the glass shattering with a sharp crack. A shard nicked my thumb. I watched, fascinated and horrified, as the small cut on my skin knitted itself closed, the skin smoothing over within seconds, leaving no mark. The broken glass on the table shimmered, changing before my eyes. Each jagged piece dissolved into a pile of fine sand, the sharp edges blurring away into soft grains. I stared at my healed thumb, then at the sand, my heart hammering. This was not possible. The server had been watching me, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, which had been bright and eager moments before, now held a deep knowing. They seemed to flicker, a momentary depth appearing within their cheerful surface. "The door is always open for you," she said, her voice dropping to a low, resonant tone that was not hers, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. Her lips moved, forming the words, but a different presence spoke through her. Some walk through it unknowingly. Others are drawn back, again and again, whether they remember or not. Her gaze intensified, fixing on me with an unsettling certainty. "Today, it waits again. You have already touched it." A deep chill seeped into my bones. The supernatural had just forced itself into my reality, undeniable and terrifying. I pushed through the heavy door of the butcher's block, the gloom of the restaurant giving way to the bright afternoon. A woman stood on the sidewalk, scrolling through her phone. A sudden hunger emerged inside me. It was not a hunger for food, but a violent urge to seize her, to tear at her flesh. My muscles tensed, my hands clenched into fists, driven by a dark impulse. A roar built in my throat, threatening to erupt. I fought it with everything I had, every nerve fighting against the terrifying compulsion to attack. I stumbled past her, forcing my legs to move, my breath ragged, barely escaping the building with my sanity intact. The sun's warmth enveloped me, a pressure on my skin. It felt like a deep cleanse, stripping away the suffocating feeling that had almost consumed me. I looked down at my hand. The place on my thumb where the glass had cut it earlier was smooth, the skin completely healed, showing no mark of any previous injury. I reached my car and slid into the driver's seat. Nolte sat quietly in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He had not spoken a word since we arrived at the restaurant, and his quietness was unusual for him. He turned his head slowly toward me then, his expression serious. "Your blood has a scent now," he said, his voice low. "A strong scent. You have marked yourself, and that door will open. You just need to make sure it opens the right way. Your scent could open it the wrong way." A cold dread settled over me, and a horrifying sense of imminent danger rooted deep in my bones. I always awoke at precisely 6 o'clock, the internal clock governing my existence at Durham University, with the same exacting standards I applied to my mathematical proofs. Numbers, equations, and the absolute certainty of verifiable data formed the bedrock of my world. I had meticulously constructed this reality, brick by logical brick, since I pushed away the childhood images of Mr. Black and the fantastical city of Taliesis. Those had been mere figments, innocent inventions of a boy's mind, firmly relegated to the realm of discarded imagination. Yet, an unexplained pull often drew me into the quiet corners of ancient libraries, my fingers tracing the brittle pages of forgotten texts. My colleague, Robert, acknowledged this peculiar interest with a gentle indulgence, a curious deviation from my otherwise rigid adherence to reason. He saw it as a harmless eccentricity. That quiet denial shattered one Tuesday afternoon. I had been walking through the art department building, a place I rarely frequented, when a flash of color snagged my attention through an open studio door. A young student, Elizabeth, stood before an easel. The painting on the canvas depicted a city, a place of impossible towers and swirling pathways, bathed in an otherworldly light. It was Taliesis. My breath caught in my throat. Every detail, every impossible angle pulsed with a vivid accuracy that echoed the forgotten landscapes of my earliest memories. The sight struck me with the force of a physical blow, igniting a dormant, dangerous yearning deep within me. This unexpected encounter challenged the very foundations of my rational world, threatening to unravel the carefully woven fabric of my existence. The sight of Elizabeth's painting had not merely ignited a yearning, it had set my world alight. My initial elation warped into a fervent obsession that consumed me. My days at the university became a blur, punctuated only by my increasingly intense discussions with Elizabeth about Taliesis. I found myself drawn to her, not just for the shared vision, but for a desperate hope that she might ground me. We married within months, an act that was desperate and illogical for a man who prided himself on logic. For a brief time, her presence offered a fragile respite, a semblance of normalcy in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. But the whispers of Taliesis began to permeate the campus. Students, curious and impressionable, spoke of the city, drawn by a similar allure. The painted world Elizabeth had brought to life awakened something in their minds. My colleague Robert had at first offered his usual gentle indulgence, then a worried caution, but then he too began to change. His questions grew sharper, his eyes held a new, burning light. He confessed to seeing the city in his dreams, to feeling its call. His academic work suffered. He abandoned his lectures, his research, his entire life for the relentless pursuit of Taliesis. I watched him splinter, his sanity fracturing in a disturbing, self-immolating act of devotion. He sold his house, packed a single bag, and simply vanished, leaving behind only frantic, nonsensical notes detailing paths to a city that did not exist. Witnessing Robert's tragic ruin should have been a deterrent, a chilling warning. Instead, I rationalized my own escalating obsession. Robert was weak, I told myself, easily swayed. I possessed the intellect, the mathematical rigor, to understand this phenomenon. I was not falling into delusion. I was on the precipice of uncovering a crucial truth, one that was undeniable. This conviction became a shield against the growing concern in Elizabeth's eyes, a barrier against the university administration's stern warnings about my deteriorating performance. My lectures became diatribes on impossible geometry. My research grants went unfulfilled. Elizabeth grew distant, her patience worn thin by my relentless focus on the painted city, my inability to see anything else. I saw her frustration, her despair, yet I could not stop. My career, my marriage, everything was jeopardized, but I believed I was closer than anyone had ever been to Taliesis. The university administration had followed through on its threats, stripping me of my professorship. Elizabeth, her love and patience finally exhausted, had left with barely a word. taking with her the last vestiges of my life outside the painted canvas. I was left utterly alone in the house, except for my young son and the enormous painting of Taliesis that dominated the living room wall. My world had shrunk to these confines, a prisoner in my worn armchair. Days bled into weeks, weeks into years, as I sat gazing at the impossible spires and swirling pathways, convinced the truth lay just beyond my reach. I wasted away, my body becoming as insubstantial as the visions in my mind. I never spoke of Taliesis to my son, hoping to shield him from the relentless torment that had consumed me. He was a quiet boy, often playing alone with his wooden blocks on the rug at my feet. One night the room grew cold, though no window was open. A shadow detached itself from the deepest corner of the room, coalescing into a figure. It was Mr. Black, taller and darker than I remembered from my fractured childhood memories. He moved without sound, his form absorbing the dim light from the single lamp. My heart did not pound with fear, but with a sudden, desperate hope that this was my moment, my reward for decades of unwavering devotion. He walked past my chair, his gaze not meeting mine. He stopped beside my son, who lay sleeping peacefully on the rug. The boy stirred, his eyes fluttering open to the dark, silent figure hovering above him. Mr. Black reached down, his dark hand extending. My son did not cry out. He simply looked at the figure, then at the painting of Taliesis, and then, without a sound, he was gone. The space where my son had been was empty. The cold dissipated, and the room returned to its mundane reality. I sat paralyzed, not by grief for my lost child, but by a consuming, bitter realization. Taliesis had come, not for me, its most devoted seeker, but for my innocent son, a boy who knew nothing of its lure. I had sacrificed everything for that world, driven everyone away, destroyed my own life, only to be abandoned at the precipice. The fantasy I had pursued with every fiber of my being, the truth I had believed myself destined to uncover, had ultimately rejected me, leaving me utterly alone in the world I had fought so hard to escape. I signed the contract for the graveyard shift because the pay was incredibly good, even though the recruiter's instructions had included some unusual details, and I really needed the money, so I paid them little mind. He spoke about the office as if it possessed a distinct personality, explaining how the copy machine sometimes refused to operate if it felt disrespected after midnight, and mentioned the office plants had particular preferences for quiet surroundings, demanding a certain level of tranquility to thrive. I dismissed these peculiar guidelines as mere eccentricities of an old building, perhaps an overly imaginative manager's attempts at humor to keep new hires entertained. I simply smiled during the orientation, already picturing the comfortable apartment I would soon afford and the freedom that substantial salary offered. My new routine would begin promptly at 8 in the evening, watching over what I expected to be deserted corridors, and I felt nothing but anticipation for the quiet solitude, the steady income, and the prospect of finally having enough money to breathe freely. The recruiter's parting words about respecting the building echoed without meaning as I walked out, completely convinced I understood the simple terms of my employment. At exactly 8 o'clock, the subtle building noises changed. The low electrical current that usually ran through the walls died, and the office lights flickered once before settling into a strange, sickly yellow glow. I looked at the security monitors and saw only static snow on every screen, the external feeds gone completely blank, disconnecting me from the city outside. A deep groan rumbled through the floorboards below my feet, a sound that vibrated up through my bones, and then the tiles in the hallway began to heave. Cracks spread outward as gray, withered hands pushed through the floor, followed by heads matted with dry hair, and then entire torsos clad in tattered office wear. Bodies pulled themselves up, some missing limbs, others with gaping holes in their chests, and a terrible stench filled the air. They were the staff, or what was left of them, now moving with a jerky, mindless gait down the corridor. My heart hammered against my ribs, and cold sweat ran down my back as I backed away from the monitors. This was not a joke. I needed to understand, or escape, and a desperate impulse pushed me towards the basement, a place I had been told to avoid. I stumbled down the concrete stairs, the air growing colder with each step, the groaning sounds multiplying from the depths below. At the bottom, a vast cavern opened, filled with an unimaginable multitude of these rising figures, a sea of shuffling, decaying workers extending into the darkness. Their hollow eyes seemed to catch the weak light, and a collective moan rose from their numbers, a sound of perpetual agony. The horror was confirmed. This building housed a terrible secret, and I was trapped inside it. Pure terror gripped me, forcing a sudden, frantic scramble back up the stairs, my legs burning with exertion. I ran through the corridors, past the empty, now menacing offices, until I burst into the small, locked security room, slamming the heavy door shut behind me, gasping for breath and hoping for safety. I huddled in the security room, my breath tearing in my throat. The horrifying sounds amplified my fear. Desperate, I screamed at the shambling figures on the monitors, a raw sound tearing from my chest. "Stop! Leave me alone!" I yelled, my voice cracking. And then an impossible thing happened. The entire undead procession froze, every withered body standing absolutely still in the eerie yellow light, their vacant stares fixed forward. They had obeyed. I had commanded them, and a chilling realization dawned upon me. Simultaneously, a searing pain erupted on my left wrist, a sudden burning that branded itself into my skin. I looked down and saw a symbol, glowing with an internal sickly green light, imprinted deeply into my flesh. The central monitor, showing only static moments before, cleared itself with an unnatural whine, displaying a single ghoul closer than the others, its tattered suit recognizable. It was the recruiter, a horrifying version of him. His eyes held malevolent intelligence. "Welcome, manager," he rasped, his voice a dry, grating sound that vibrated in my skull. "We have been expecting you." The other ghouls on the surrounding screens began to murmur, individual voices returning, a horrifying chorus of recognition spreading. He extended a skeletal hand towards the screen, as if through the glass, and a cold, clammy sensation gripped my own hand, pulling me forward. "You are now bound to this building, to its staff, and to me," he said, his grip tightening. "You will oversee them forever. This is your new employment, eternal and inescapable." My new role as manager was not a simple job. It was a permanent curse, a monstrous legacy, forever tied to the man who had tricked me into this living death. I was the building's new heart, its keeper, and its prisoner. The terror children exuded had once sustained me, an essence that fueled my existence. Now, an acute starvation consumed my being, an emptiness I had never known. I lay trapped under this boy's bed, my shadowy form shrinking, growing brittle from dwindling essence. Toby. His name was Toby. For centuries I had been the hunter, the whisper in the dark, the creature children feared most. Now, the situation had inverted completely. The air above me shifted, disturbing the trapped particles. The bed springs groaned with the slightest movement. I froze, every particle of my consciousness rigid. Toby, he was not afraid. He knew I was here, a certainty radiating from him. This was not the typical child who trembled, who offered fear as unwitting sustenance. This boy listened with deliberate focus. He waited with chilling patience. He hunted with a calculated intent. My form, usually an expansive manifestation of dread that spread through the shadows, felt thin and contained, bound by the tight space and an encompassing terror. His bare foot dropped to the floor beside the bed. I felt the slow, deliberate vibration through the floorboards. He stood there, positioned precisely next to my hiding place beneath the frame. I pulled back, pressing myself against the furthest wall, trying to meld into the deeper wood grain. His scent was close, sharp, and undeniably predatory. It did not carry the cloying sweetness of fear I had once craved and feasted upon. A small, inquisitive finger poked under the bedskirt, not blindly searching, but directly targeting my dim shadow. It moved with unnerving slowness, an exploratory probe. It traced the outline of my diminished form, a casual touch that sent shivers through my non-corporeal state. My ancient instincts urged me to lash out, to vanish into the deeper dark, to become utterly undetectable. But I could not. I was weak. I was starving. Toby knew my exact location. He held me in this helpless state, awaiting my next move. My predicament felt absolute and horrifying. I, Malefice, was the prey. I had to leave this room. My form was clinging together, barely. The terror Toby exuded was not a sustaining energy, but a corrosive force, eating away at my essence. I watched him from under the bed, his back turned as he sorted small, brightly colored blocks on a rug. The closet door stood ajar, a sliver of darkness promising some concealment. Inside, I knew, was a small ventilation grate, a narrow opening to the walls beyond. It was a perilous route, a space too small for my usual form, but my current state allowed me to contemplate it. My only chance for survival lay through that vent. The open floor was a vast, brightly lit expanse, a terrifying place under Toby's constant knowing gaze. My plan was simple, born of desperation. I would use the fleeting moments of his distraction. Moving in quick, shadowy bursts, I would dart from one piece of furniture to the next, seeking the deepest shadows each object cast. I needed to become a ripple of movement, barely disturbing the perception of the boy who hunted me. Toby hummed a tuneless song, his back still turned to me. This was my moment. I extended a sliver of my form, thin and imperceptible, along the floor. It quivered, searching for the cool, deep shadow beneath the nightstand. The journey itself felt like an eternity, each centimeter a risk. I pulled my entire diminished form after it, shrinking, consolidating every particle of my essence. I flowed out from under the bed, a dark stain spreading across the carpet. Just as I reached the edge of the nightstand's shadow, Toby paused his song. His head tilted. He did not turn, but I felt his focus shift, a cold pressure settling on the space I had just vacated. He knew. He always knew. I pressed myself against the leg of the nightstand, merging with the fabric of its shadow, trying to become nothing. His awareness was a physical presence, a weight that threatened to crush my already weakened form. I held my breath. I ceased all motion, all thought, all existence beyond the desperate desire to be unseen. Toby resumed his building, the blocks clicking softly. The tension eased a fraction, a fragile reprieve. My core essence screamed for sustenance, for release, but only escape offered any hope. The toy chest stood halfway between me and the closet, a looming, brightly painted box. Its shadow was sparse, offering little concealment. I had to cross a stretch of exposed carpet. My form was so thin now, so fragile. I launched myself forward, a desperate shadow flitting across the light. I barely made it to the toy chest, collapsing against its base, my form flickering. My core essence strained with the effort and the fear. I felt my essence dissolving, breaking apart under the harsh light of the room. Toby's eyes, even when focused on his toys, seemed to penetrate the shadows around me. He was playing with me, I realized. This elaborate charade, this dangerous journey, was merely another of his horrifying games. The closet door felt miles away. I gathered my remaining strength, a painful contraction of my dwindling self. One more sprint. One final, terrifying push towards the darkness of the closet. I launched myself from the toy chest, a desperate, fading streak of shadow. My form wavered, threatening to dissipate completely. I landed inside the closet, sliding behind a pile of neatly folded clothes, gasping for an essence I no longer had. The air inside was still and cool, a momentary relief from the oppressive light. The ventilation grate was there, high on the wall, a small rectangle of dark mesh. It was a tight squeeze, even for my current state, but it represented freedom. I began to pull myself towards it, a final surge of will propelling my weakened form upward. I would escape. I had to escape. The prospect of freedom, however fleeting, felt remote and unattainable. But I was so close. I pulled myself through the narrow vent, my form scraping against metal and dust. The passage was stifling, dark and tight, but the promise of escape drove me. I pushed, every atom of my dwindling essence committed to this final effort. I slid free, falling a short distance onto a cold concrete floor. The air here was damp and still, carrying a faint odor of decay and something sweet. I had made it. I was in the basement. I lay there for a moment, gathering my strength, my form flickering weakly in the gloom. The room was mostly dark, but a single bare light bulb glowed in the far corner, casting long, distorted shadows. I began to spread, to reclaim my shadowy form, eager to meld with the deeper dark. Then I saw it. In the circle of light, a small table was set for a tea party. There were 3 chairs, 2 small, brightly colored, and 1 larger, made of dark wood. Tiny teacups sat on saucers, a miniature teapot centered on a lace doily. On the larger chair, propped against its back, was a small, hand-drawn sign. My name was scrawled across it in a childish looping script, Malafis. A shiver colder than any dread I had ever known passed through my form. This was not random. This was prepared. A small voice, calm and clear, spoke from the edges of the light. "You took your time getting here." I whipped around, my form shrinking in on itself, searching for the source. Toby stood in the entrance, not a child any longer, but a figure of absolute, terrifying control. His eyes held a knowing depth, ancient and cold. He was smiling, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that showed too many teeth. "You didn't really think you could leave, did you?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a lullaby. "Every single exit leads to this place. Every vent, every window, every open door, they all just bring you back to the party. You were just a toy, Malafis. You are my toy now." He stepped into the light, holding something in his hand. It was a staple gun, heavy and industrial, far too large for his small hand. The metal glinted, catching the harsh light. Toby walked to the table and picked up a small stuffed bear from one of the child-sized chairs. He looked at it, then at me. "The games are starting," he said, his smile widening. He raised the staple gun, aiming it at the bear's head. A sharp thlock for screaming as a staple buried itself deep into the toy's fabric. He pulled it out, then pressed another staple into the bear's leg. "It's your turn," Toby stated, his gaze locking onto my weakened form. He extended the staple gun, pointing it directly at me, a silent, chilling invitation to a game I could not refuse. My shadowy essence recoiled, every particle screaming a horror far beyond starvation. My new purpose, Toby's permanent macabre plaything, had begun. The plane's descent had finally ended the long journey. My chest, tight with the anxiety of meeting Lauren's entire family, slowly loosened as the taxi carried us through the Irish countryside. Green fields rolled past the window, dotted with gray stone walls that crisscrossed the land. We arrived in the small village, a cluster of brightly painted houses around a central square, and pulled up to a cottage draped in climbing roses. Lauren's father opened the door, a wide smile crinkling his eyes, and her mother followed, wrapping me in a quick, firm hug. Their welcome was immediate and genuine, washing away the last remnants of my travel nerves. The house inside was a trove of warmth. A fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting a soft glow across the worn wooden floors. The scent of peat smoke and something baking filled the air. Their golden retriever, Finn, a gentle giant with a wagging tail, nudged my hand with his wet nose. We settled at the kitchen table, cups of hot tea warming our hands, sharing stories and laughter that echoed softly in the cozy room. Lauren's voice was a comfort, her hand finding mine under the table, a silent assurance that I belonged here. The initial apprehension I had carried across the ocean faded, replaced by a deep sense of ease. Days dissolved into a peaceful rhythm. Mornings began with Finn's soft whines, followed by long walks through damp fields, the air crisp and clean against my face. We explored narrow lanes, greeted villagers by name, and watched children play near the old stone bridge. Afternoons involved reading by the fire, the steady crackle of burning peat, a constant companion, or helping Lauren's mother in the garden, pruning roses and watering beds of vibrant flowers. Evenings were spent around the kitchen table, full of easy conversation that drifted between local gossip and shared memories, accompanied by the gentle clinking of dishes. Everything felt perfectly ordinary, a comforting routine settling over me. Yet sometimes an odd quietness would settle over me, a disturbance beneath the surface of my contentment. It was a fleeting sensation, a brief feeling of unease, impossible to grasp, impossible to name. I would look at Lauren, her face serene in the firelight, and wonder if she ever felt it too, this subtle shift in the air, a feeling that things were not quite right in this otherwise idyllic world. The next morning, before the rest of the house stirred, I found myself awake early. Finn whined softly by the bed, his tail thumping against the floor, so I let him out, pulling on a jacket, and decided to walk towards the bogland Lauren had mentioned. A silver mist still clung to the fields, blurring the edges of the distant trees. The air felt cool on my face, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and growing things. We followed a narrow track that soon dissolved into a spongy path of dark, compacted earth, and water collected in shallow pools reflecting the gray sky. Tall rushes grew in dense clumps, their tips beaded with dew. The ground squelched under my boots with each step, a steady, wet sound that filled the quiet morning. Finn darted ahead, his nose to the ground, occasionally disappearing behind a rise of peat, then reappearing with a satisfied sniff. Everything felt perfectly ordinary, a continuation of the peace that had settled over me during the past days. The slight unease from before had vanished completely in the crisp morning air. I walked around a particularly large pool of dark water, avoiding a patch of deeper mud. Finn suddenly stopped ahead, his hackles rising, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He stood rigid, staring into a small hollow behind a cluster of gnarled bushes. I called his name, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness, and started towards him, a vague irritation at his sudden stop. As I drew closer, a strange odor reached me, like something decaying, yet different. Finn let out a sharp bark, then a choked yelp, backing away slowly, his tail tucked low against his belly. Then I saw it. It lay half-merged in a shallow, muddy hollow, a pale, bulbous mass against the dark peat. Thick, purplish tubes extended from its main body, disappearing into the surrounding earth. A larger central tube pulsed and a dark, sticky liquid dripped from its end. There was no head, no limbs, only this mound of flesh and growths that expanded and contracted slowly. A single, wide, lidless eye, milky and black, stared blankly from its side. It did not blink. My stomach clenched. A cold dread filled me, erasing the cool morning air. I took a stumbling step back, my breath catching in my throat. Finn whimpered, pressing himself against my leg, shivering. The peaceful bog and quiet morning dissolved around me. I wanted only to run from the sight. Panic surged, hot and frantic, making my legs unsteady. I spun around, pulling Finn with me, and stumbled away from the hollow. My heart beat hard against my ribs. The thing's image remained in my mind, a terrible vision that would not leave. My lungs burned with each ragged breath, but I did not stop. Finn kept pace beside me, his usual playful energy replaced by a panicked urgency. The squelching mud, the grasping rushes, the uneven ground, none of it registered beyond obstacles to clear. I needed distance, a vast, undeniable space between me and that thing. The world spun, a blur of gray sky and dark bogland. We ran until the burning in my chest was absolute, until the bog gave way to the familiar, firmer ground of the track leading back to the village. Only then did I slow, leaning against a rough stone wall, gasping for air, my entire body trembling. My breath still rasped in my throat, each intake a sharp sting. Finn pressed himself against my leg, his body quivering, a low, continuous growl vibrating deep in his chest. We stood there for a long time, leaning against the cold stone, the world a blurry expanse of gray mist and dark bogland. The sickening image of the creature pulsed behind my eyes. I wanted to stay there, to pretend it did not exist, to run back to the warmth of the cottage and never look at the bog again. A sound reached me then. It was a wet, gasping moan. The sound came again, a desperate, gurgling, choked noise that seemed to carry across the damp air. It was the creature. It was suffering. My heart clenched with a cold understanding. The noise pierced my frantic thoughts. I had fled its horror, but I had left it to a slow, agonizing end. A horrifying sense of responsibility settled on me. I felt drawn towards it. I could not just leave it there to slowly die. Finn whined, his entire body shaking. He strained against my grip, his eyes fixed on the direction of the hollow. The gurgling sounds continued, each one bringing more distress. I knew I had to go back. I took a deep, shuddering breath and started walking, pulling Finn with me. We moved slowly, each step feeling heavy and wrong, back towards the place I had desperately escaped. The air carried the scent of peat. It also carried something else, something metallic and sickening, growing stronger with every step. The hollow opened before us again. The creature pulsed with a sickening rhythm. Its single eye remained open, milky and black, staring blankly into the gray sky. The purplish tubes still wriggled slightly, drawing something from the earth. A pool of dark, viscous fluid collected beneath its bulk, spreading slowly into the peat. The central tube throbbed erratically. The gurgling was louder now, closer, a continuous wet sound of profound agony. Finn launched himself forward with a savage bark, breaking free from my hand on his harness. He clamped his jaws onto one of the thick tubes. A new, more piercing shriek tore from the creature. More dark fluid erupted from the wound Finn created, splattering onto the surrounding peat. I threw myself at Finn, grabbing his harness again with both hands. His muscles were rigid, his teeth still locked onto the creature. I wrestled him away, pulling with all my strength, until his jaws finally released. Finn struggled against me, barking furiously, desperate to return to the attack. The creature writhed, a terrible, helpless spasm rippling through its bulk. Its single eye seemed to roll, unfocused, its gurgling intensifying into a frantic, choked gasping. I looked from Finn, snarling and straining against me, to the suffering mass in the hollow. The sounds it made were not natural, but they were sounds of absolute pain, raw and desperate. I could not leave it to this slow, horrific end. I could not let Finn tear it apart piece by piece. My mind raced, but there was only one conclusion, one horrifying, undeniable truth. A cold, terrible certainty settled in my gut. There was only one way to stop it. I had to end its life. The thought itself was monstrous, an unholy suggestion in the quiet bog. My hands started to shake. I could not stop them. What do I use? There was nothing here. Only the mud and the wet peat in the ancient stones. I released Finn for a moment, pushing him away from the hollow. He stood there, panting, still trembling with aggression. My eyes scanned the bog. A large stone lay half-buried nearby. It had a jagged edge. My stomach churned, each muscle strained as I bent to grasp the stone. The surface of the stone was rough. It felt cold and alien in my hands. It was heavy, a blunt weapon. The gurgling shifted to a frantic, choked gasping. The creature was dying slowly. I lifted the stone, my arm shaking. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body resisted this act, this terrible, necessary violence. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I could not do this, but I had to. I could not bear its suffering. I could not bear this decision. The stone felt immensely heavy in my trembling hands. I opened my eyes, fixed them on the pulsating mass, and brought the stone down. The stone struck with a sickening crunch. A final tremor ran through the creature, then it was still. A terrible quiet settled over the hollow, broken only by my ragged breathing. My hands shook. Finn, no longer growling, stood beside me, his head lowered, staring at the motionless mass. I could not look at it. I turned, pulling Finn. We walked away, each step heavy. The bog, peaceful before, now felt like a place of secrets. The gray sky pressed down, mirroring the weight in my chest. The world had changed. We found our way back to the cottage as the mist lifted. My clothes were smeared with mud and a darker substance. My face felt cold. Lauren was in the kitchen. She looked up when we entered. Her smile faded. Her eyes swept over my mud-streaked clothes, then landed on Finn, his fur matted with dark fluid. His usual energy was gone. He walked close to my leg, his tail low. Lauren's eyes widened. I only shook my head, unable to speak. She understood the terror in my expression. She led me to the utility room. She helped me scrub the mud and residue from my hands and face. She washed Finn too, her movements gentle, her face held worry. Questions hung in the air, unasked. Dinner that evening was a torture. The scent of roasted lamb, the clink of forks, the murmur of Lauren's parents' conversation felt distant, alien. I sat at the table, my plate untouched. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Lauren's father spoke of the harvest, her mother of a new garden. I tried to nod, to manage smiles, but my jaw felt stiff. Every flicker of the firelight brought the creature's image back. Its single eye, its last gurgle. Lauren sat opposite me. Her eyes, knowing, met mine. I saw the horror mirrored there, the unspoken understanding. She had not been in the bog, but she grasped it. The mud, the residue, the terror on my face, Finn's quietness. She knew something terrible had happened. Her hand found mine beneath the tablecloth, her fingers intertwining. It was not easy comfort, but something heavier, a grip of shared burden. Her parents continued their conversation, oblivious to the invisible wall that had risen between Lauren and me. We were together, yet separated from them. The secret had begun to grow between us. It was a weighty truth, a binding force. It tied us together in a way nothing else could. Our relationship had changed. We had shared something that could never be articulated. This truth was a permanent mark upon the cottage's warmth, upon the green of the fields. We were bound by the creature, by the decision, by the silence at the table. The days that followed were different. The quietness between Lauren and me was no longer fleeting. It was a presence that sat between us at every meal, during every walk. We still walked the lanes, greeted neighbors, but our conversations remained on surface things, careful avoidance marking our words whenever the bog or that morning came close. Our bond deepened, born from the terror we shared. We knew something no one else could ever know. This knowledge set us apart, a silent barrier between us and the warmth of her family. The cottage, once a haven, now held the shadow of that morning. Finn still nudged my hand, but his eyes held a knowing quietness. Our future, once open, now stretched before us, tied to this unspeakable event. We were bound, not just by love, but by the weight of what we had seen and done. The secret had remade us, isolating our lives, forever changed. Ilara woke me before the sun had properly risen, her small hand pressing insistently on my arm. She was not a child given to remembering her dreams, much less recounting them with such vivid detail, so her urgency immediately snagged my attention. Her eyes, usually bright with morning wonder, held a distant, troubled look as she described the dream, each word clear and steady in the dim room. "There was a loud knocking at the door, Mama," she began, her voice a soft murmur. "It was very hard, like someone wanted to break it down. Then a voice told me not to open it. It was a deep voice, but not a kind one. It said, 'Do not answer the door, not for anything.' But you did, Mama. You opened it anyway." My breath caught somewhere deep in my chest. I sat up, pulling her closer, feeling the sudden chill despite the warmth of our bed. "I did?" I asked, though the question felt rhetorical even as I spoke it. My daughter nodded, her gaze fixed on something I could not see. "Yes, you did. You opened it, and then it came in." She hugged me tightly, burying her face into my nightgown. Her small body trembled slightly, a tremor I felt mirrored inside myself. She did not describe what it was, only the certainty of its presence and its entry. My life follows the old ways, acknowledging forces beyond common understanding, so I am not easily frightened by talk of spirits or strange occurrences. Yet Ilara's dream was different. It carried an unsettling weight, a specific, pointed accusation that struck deeper than any ghost story. The idea of my own hand inviting an unknown terror into our home, into her life, sent a cold thread tightening through my gut. The soft morning light seemed suddenly cold, and the air around us grew thick with unspoken warning. A real fear, one born of impending consequence, settled itself over me. The days that followed Ilara's dream carried a strange quiet. I found myself listening more intently to the ordinary sounds of our home, the creak of old floorboards, the wind brushing against the windows, the soft murmur of Ilara's play. I searched for an echo of the dream's warning, but our life continued its calm rhythm, lulling me into a false sense of security. The chilling premonition began to recede, settling into the recesses of my mind as just another oddity in a life that knew many of them. Then, one evening, as dusk settled and the kitchen filled with the warmth of supper, a single sharp rap sounded at the front door. It was an abrupt, startling sound, louder than any normal visitor would make. My husband, Silas, paused with a spoon halfway to his mouth. Ilara, sitting at the table, stopped humming her quiet tune. We exchanged a quick glance, a flicker of confusion passing between us. Before any of us could speak, the knocking began again, harder this time, a rapid, insistent drum against the solid wood. The sound grew, escalating quickly from insistent to violent. It was not the knock of a person, it was a furious battering, as if something hurled itself against the door repeatedly, demanding entry. The old house groaned with each impact, vibrations traveling up through the floorboards and into our very bones. The peaceful evening shattered, replaced by an urgent, terrifying rhythm. Ilara's small face, illuminated by the flickering hearth fire, drained of color. Her eyes, wide and fixed on me, held a profound terror I had seen only once before, in the memory of a dream. The knocking continued, relentless and savage. It filled the entire house, resonating with a primeval force that sent a cold dread through me. It was too fast, too loud, too desperate to be human. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but none came. There was only the sound, a monstrous echo of Ilara's whispered warning. Every crash against the wood brought me closer to a terrible understanding. This was the knocking from the dream, precisely as she had described it, a tangible invasion of our reality. The air grew thick with unspoken fear, the certainty of something dreadful standing just outside, pressing in. The relentless, savage battering continued, rattling the glass in the windows and making the very floorboards vibrate beneath our feet. Silas stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief and terror, but a primal, desperate need to understand what caused such violence surged through me. I had to see it. I had to find a rational explanation for the assault on our home. Taking a hesitant, unsteady breath, I pushed myself from the table, my legs feeling heavy and uncertain. "Stay here, Ilara," I managed to instruct, my voice a strained whisper as I moved towards the door. My hand reached for the cold iron latch, hesitating only for a moment before pushing it down. I braced myself for a direct confrontation, for the sight of some enraged animal or a person driven mad by unknown motives. I pulled the heavy oak door inward with a sudden, forceful tug. The abrupt cessation of the furious noise was jarring, a deafening absence that echoed in the sudden quiet. The cold night air rushed into the warmth of our home, carrying the sharp scent of damp earth and distant pine. My eyes scanned the narrow porch and the frosted path leading to the gate. There was nothing. No person stood there, no animal, no object or force that could have created such a monstrous, demanding racket. The small porch light illuminated only empty wooden steps, a bare patch of frost-kissed lawn, and the silent, dark woods that bordered our property. The world outside looked peaceful and untouched, as though the terrifying knocking had never happened. A cold dread, more piercing than the night air, began to coil in my stomach. I stepped out onto the porch, turning my head from side to side, peering into the shadows that clung to the edges of the yard. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze and the distant call of an owl. There was simply nothing there, only the void where something tangible should have been. The lack of a physical source was more terrifying than any monster could have been, for it meant the threat was not of this world, not subject to the laws I understood. I retreated back into the house, pulling the heavy door shut behind me, the latch clicking with a sound that seemed terribly final. The silence inside felt charged, oppressive, filled with an invisible presence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped within my chest. I turned towards the kitchen table, my gaze finding Ilara. She had not moved from her seat. Her small hands lay flat on the smooth wood, and her eyes, though still wide, held a calm, terrible knowing. "You opened it, Mama," she stated, her voice clear and steady in the sudden quiet, devoid of accusation or fear, only a simple, chilling statement of fact. "You opened the door, just like the voice said you would." My breath caught in my throat, a painful constriction. She looked directly at me, her small face grave and entirely certain. And now it has come in. A cold wave washed over me, a terror that eclipsed all prior fear, settling itself deep within my bones. The weight of her words settled onto my shoulders, a crushing burden of my own making, a terrible, undeniable culpability. My own hand, my own desperate hope for a rational explanation, had fulfilled the warning. The threat was no longer a shadow outside, a promise of future dread. It was here, within our walls, an invited guest that had now become an inescapable resident, filling our home with its invisible, terrifying presence. The dread was absolute, permeating every fiber of my being, and I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that our lives would never be the same again. My ears still rang from the frantic banging that had shaken the door only moments ago. A terrible quiet settled over the small room. I pressed myself against the cold wall, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, dread pooling in my gut. A sickening odor, a cloying sweetness with a metallic tang, began to seep through the air vents. The fluorescent lights overhead stuttered, casting long, jumping shadows across the dusty floor before a sickly yellow glow stabilized. Rohit still stood by the classroom door, his back to me, but his posture had changed. His shoulders hunched, his head tilted as if listening to something distant. Then his left arm twitched, a violent spasm that pulled his hand into a claw. His fingers scraped against the doorframe, a faint grating sound. I watched his reflection in the darkened window. His head snapped to the side, then rotated further, beyond normal range, until his chin rested on his shoulder, and his unblinking eyes met my horrified gaze in the glass. He was not looking at me. He was listening, his body twisting, responding to an unheard command. A low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest, a raw, alien noise, and his whole body began to ripple with a terrible, shuddering energy. Every muscle seemed to flex, then seize, pulling his form into grotesque twists. He took a single, deliberate step away from the door, moving with shocking precision despite tremors, turning his full, unnerving attention towards my hiding place. I held my breath, every nerve screaming, knowing I could not move. The guttural sound from Rohit escalated into a tearing choke, and I bolted. My muscles screamed as I pushed through the classroom door, my hand brushing against something viscous and firm on the frame. I didn't pause to see. I burst into the empty corridor, the air thick with the cloying metallic scent. My momentum carried me to the heavy fire door, which I heaved open, plunging into the stairwell. The dim emergency lights struggled to pierce the gloom. Here, the pervasive sweetness of the air intensified, sickly and overpowering. I looked down, my breath hitching. The stone steps were not slick with residue. They were coated in it. A thick, pale, fibrous slime clung to the banister and spread across the treads, shining with an unhealthy gleam. It looked like masses of stretched, rope-like tissue, firm and yielding beneath my steps. I had to kick some away, feeling its stubborn, organic resistance as my shoe dislodged sections. This was not a sickness contaminating individuals. It was a biological spread, growing and claiming the structure itself. My heart pounded with a fresh, terrible understanding as I forced myself up the winding stairs, ignoring the burning in my legs and the growing nausea. I shoved open the heavy door to the roof, gasping for ragged breaths, and stumbled onto the terrace. The city lay before me, an enormous, unlit void. The grid of streetlights was dark, and no illuminated windows pierced the vast, oppressive blanket of shadow. A few distant emergency lights flickered on a far-off tower, but otherwise, there was only blackness. Then the sounds assaulted me. A raw chorus of desperate screams rose and fell from countless unseen points below, punctuated by the sustained blaring distress calls of car horns. Beneath this chaotic din, a new, monstrous rhythm began to assert itself. From the hulking, shadowed mass of the hostel across the street, a deep thumping started. It was a regular, resonant pulse that vibrated through the ground, shaking the very concrete beneath my feet. This was too huge, too coordinated to be individuals. This was something widespread, an accelerating force of destruction consuming the city. I looked down into the black void of the street. The city was a vast, unmoving shadow, save for the scattered screams and the distant rhythmic thumping that now seemed to emanate from everywhere. Then I saw movement. A hulking mass began to drift down the empty street, a dark silhouette against the deeper blackness of the urban landscape. Its form was an obscene mockery of human anatomy, bloated in places, stretched beyond natural limits in others. One limb, a grotesque column of flesh, twisted and dragged along the asphalt with a scraping sound that even from this height carried through the still air. Other limbs, disproportionate and thick, seemed to paddle at the ground, propelling the monstrous bulk forward with an uneven, lurching gait. The head was buried deep within its swollen shoulders. Its overall posture suggested a creature that sensed its way through the darkness. It moved slowly, then paused, its entire body quivering. The deep thumping from the hostel intensified for a moment, and the creature below responded, its massive bulk turning with laborious precision towards the building, as if drawn by the vibrations rippling through the ground, through the very air. This was not simply infection. This was a rapid biological transformation, horrific and complete, a reshaping of flesh and bone into something alien and terrible. Rohit was merely a beginning, a glimpse into the process. The thing on the street was a grotesque culmination, a testament to the speed and intensity of this mutation. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a realization that humanity was being twisted, consumed, and remade. The cold dread intensified, focusing on my immediate surroundings. A light, precise tapping sound came from somewhere behind the large, concrete water tank on the terrace. It was irregular, yet deliberate, followed by a harsh, wet exhalation. The breath was close, too close, and it was not my own. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I froze, pressing myself flat against the low parapet wall, my body rigid, trying to disappear into the rough concrete. The quiet, punctuated by the city's distant dying chorus and the thumping, suddenly felt charged with a new, personal danger. Escape. The word screamed in my mind. The metal fire escape, a series of rusting ladders and platforms clinging dangerously to the building's side, offered a desperate, dangerous path down. It was a long drop to the next floor, a perilous descent into the dark, but staying here with whatever lurked behind the water tank was a certain end.